For 3 weeks, I secretly built my son's luxury apartment, while his fiancée treated me like a worker, never knowing I was the father of the man she was about to marry. Then I overheard her whisper to her mother on the phone, "After the wedding, everything will go according to plan. He won't know anything, and his family's assets will soon be ours." I kept working, but this time I started watching her every move. You're watching Dad's revenge stories, and I'm grateful that you chose to spend your time here. Before we begin, leave a comment telling me your country or city. I'd love to know where this story reaches you from. Also, please remember, this story includes fictional details created for entertainment and learning. Any similarity to names or places is purely coincidental, but the lesson is valuable. The morning everything changed. Started the way every morning had started since Margaret died, with a pot of coffee I brewed for two out of pure muscle memory, and a second mug I set on the counter before I caught myself. 18 months. You'd think the habit would have broken by now. It hadn't. Some habits don't break. They just remind you of what's gone. I stood at the kitchen window in our house in Oak Park and watched the neighbor's dog drag his leash through the front yard, while his owner jogged behind huffing clouds of breath into the cold October air. The maple in our front yard had turned fully red overnight. Margaret would have made me take a photograph of it. She had an album somewhere, 3 albums actually full of nothing but trees in fall color. I never understood it when she was alive. Standing there with my second mug of coffee going cold on the counter, I understood it completely. My name is Thomas Miller. I'm 68 years old. I spent 42 years as a general contractor in the Chicago area, built or renovated somewhere north of 300 residential and commercial properties, and retired 2 years ago when my knees started sending me messages I could no longer ignore. My son Daniel, 35, works in finance downtown, had been after me to sell the Oak Park house and move somewhere smaller for the better part of a year. I kept telling him I'd think about it. What I meant was, this is the house where your mother hung her coat on the same hook for 31 years, and I'm not ready to take it down yet. The phone rang at 8:15. Robert Hayes. I picked up before the second ring because Robert only called before 9 when something was actually worth saying. "Tom." His voice had that brisk, get-to-the-point energy I'd known since we worked side by side on the Westfield Commons project back in 1987. "You doing anything this month?" "Watching the maple turn red," I said. "Why?" "Because I've got a situation at Harlow Tower, and you're the only person I trust to fix it." He explained quickly. A contractor named Briggs had been managing the finish-out on a penthouse unit, 24th floor, full lake view, the kind of job that costs more per square foot than most people's entire homes. Briggs had slipped off a ladder at another site 3 days ago. Broken ankle out for 6 weeks minimum. The unit needed to be completed and ready for handover in 30 days. The owner was paying a premium. Robert needed someone who could walk in Monday morning, read a set of plans without asking basic questions, and manage a crew of 4 without drama. "I'm retired, Robert," I said. "You've been retired for 2 years, and you've repainted your garage 3 times, he said. "Tom, come on. It's 1 month. 4 weeks. You can do this in your sleep." I turned from the window and looked at the kitchen table, the one Margaret had found at a yard sale in Evanston back in 2003, refinished herself over a long weekend, and declared the best purchase she'd ever made. The coffee ring she'd left on the corner was still there. I'd never been able to bring myself to sand it out. "What's the client's name?" I asked. "It's in the file. D. Miller. Some kind of finance guy. Pays on time, doesn't hover. You won't even meet him, most likely. D. Miller." I rolled it around in my head for exactly 1 second. Miller was one of the 5 most common surnames in Illinois. I didn't think twice. "Send me the plans tonight," I said. I'll be on site Monday at 7. Robert exhaled like a man who'd been holding his breath. I owe you one, Tom. You owe me about 40, I said. Start counting. Harlow Tower stood on the north end of the loop. 40 stories of glass and steel that caught the afternoon sun off Lake Michigan and threw it back at you like a dare. I'd driven past it 100 times without giving it much thought. Walking through the lobby Monday morning with my tool bag over one shoulder and a roll of plans under my arm, I felt something I hadn't felt in 2 years, the particular kind of focus that only comes when you're about to put your hands on something unfinished. The building manager, a compact woman named Carol, who wore her keycard lanyard like a badge of authority, rode the elevator with me to the 24th floor and talked the whole way up about moisture barriers and the previous contractor's scheduling failures. I nodded at the right moments. I'd heard versions of this speech on every job I'd ever taken. The details changed. The frustration never did. Unit 2401 opened onto a wide entry hall with 10-foot ceilings and floor-to-ceiling windows that looked north toward Wrigleyville and east toward the lake. The bones were extraordinary. The finish work was about 60% complete hardwood floors, laid, but not sanded kitchen cabinetry installed, but missing hardware. A lighting system that was wired but not yet configured. Solid work up to the point Briggs had left it. Competent, but not inspired. I walked every room twice before I said a word. The crew Marcus, a broad-shouldered man of about 50 who'd been in Finnish carpentry his whole life, 2 younger guys named Pete and Darnell, and an electrician named Sean who was subcontracted separately, watched me from the kitchen doorway. They'd worked with 3 different supervisors in the past 2 months. They were waiting to see what kind of problem I was going to be. Good bones, I said, crouching to look at the seam where the flooring met the baseboard in the hallway. Briggs did right by the subfloor. We've got about 28 working days. That's enough if nobody does anything twice. I stood and looked at Marcus. You know this material. Know it better than my own living room, he said. Good. Then let's talk about sequencing. I signed the site, Log accepted the key fob for the unit, and we got to work. By noon, I'd reorganized the task list, moved the lighting configuration to the last week to avoid conflicts with the floor finishing, and sourced a hardware supplier 2 blocks away who could deliver cabinet pulls by Wednesday. By 4 in the afternoon, the unit felt like a job site with a direction instead of a problem waiting to happen. Driving back to Oak Park that evening, I passed through the tunnel under the river and felt the city give way to the suburbs, the way it always had gradually, then all at once. I pulled into my driveway and sat in the truck for a moment before going inside. The kitchen light was on. I'd left it on by accident that morning. For 1/2 second, my chest did the thing it still did, the involuntary leap of thinking someone was home. Then reality settled back into place, the way it always did, quiet and complete. I went inside, poured myself a glass of water, and stood at the counter looking at the oven clock. 6:47. I thought about calling Daniel the way I always thought about calling Daniel and then didn't because our conversations had become careful things weather work surface. He was busy. He had his life. I respected that. I didn't call. I reheated leftover chili 8 at Margaret's table and went to bed at 9:30 with the plans for Unit 2401 spread across her side of the mattress. For the first time in months, I fell asleep before I finished reading them. By the 3rd morning at Harlow Tower, I had a rhythm that felt almost like the old days coffee at 5:30 on the expressway by 6:15. Marcus already pulling equipment from the storage closet when I stepped off the elevator at 7. The floors were responding beautifully to the sanding equipment. Darnell had a gift for trim work that he was too young to fully appreciate yet. Pete needed supervision, but did everything he was told without argument, which in my experience was rarer and more valuable than natural talent. What I didn't have a rhythm for was her. She arrived at 10:12 on Wednesday morning without knocking. Not that there was a door to knock on, since we'd removed it temporarily to protect it from dust. Wearing a camel-colored coat that probably cost more than my truck payment, and carrying a coffee cup with the logo of a place downtown that charged $9 for a latte. She walked in like she'd been walking into this apartment her entire life. Her eyes moving across the space in quick assessing sweeps the way a building inspector looks at a room not to appreciate it, but to find what's wrong with it. She did not look at me. She looked at the cabinet line along the kitchen wall, tilted her head maybe 15 degrees, and said to no one in particular, "That stain is darker than the sample I approved." Marcus and I exchanged a glance behind her back. I stepped forward. "Good morning. I'm Tom Miller, the site supervisor. The stain matches the manufacturer code on your design contract. I checked it this morning against the sample sheet." I held up the folder I'd brought specifically for situations like this. "Would you like to compare them directly?" She turned and looked at me then, or rather she looked at the folder. I didn't ask about the code. She said, her voice perfectly pleasant in the way that pleasant voices sometimes are when the person using them has no interest in actual conversation. I asked who made the decision. "The decision was made by the designer and confirmed in writing before installation," I said. "If there's a discrepancy between what was specified and what you were shown at the showroom, that's a conversation for your designer. I can give you her contact information." She considered this for approximately 1 second, then turned back to the cabinets. "I want the hardware pulls moved up 2 centimeters. The current placement sits too low visually. I wrote it in my notebook. I'll have that adjusted before end of day." She moved through the apartment like that for another 20 minutes, pointing, requesting, occasionally asking questions that weren't really questions. She wanted the primary bedroom's window treatment changed from motorized to manual operation. She wanted the under-cabinet lighting in the kitchen set to a warmer color temperature. She wanted the bathroom tile grout sealed before the final walkthrough rather than after. All of it reasonable. None of it delivered with anything resembling acknowledgement that the people she was talking to were people. At one point, her phone rang. She answered it while standing 6 feet in front of me and said, "Hold on, let me ask the worker," and then turned and asked me the ceiling height in the second bedroom. I told her 9 feet 2 inches. She relayed this to whoever was on the phone and walked back toward the window without a word in my direction. The worker. I'd been called worse things on job sites. I'd been ignored by people with more money than sense for 4 decades. The feeling that moved through my chest wasn't quite anger. It was something older and quieter than that, the particular weariness of a man who has spent his life building things for people who would never once think to ask his name. When she left at 10:40, Marcus waited until the elevator doors closed, and then looked at me with an expression that said everything he wasn't going to say out loud. "Do the hardware pulls," I told him. 2 centimeters up. "Already measuring," he said. She was back Thursday afternoon this time with a printed list. 7 items single-spaced in a font that told me she'd thought about this list before she arrived. The socket placement in the home office needed to be repositioned. The entry closet shelving needed an additional bracket for load distribution, which was actually a reasonable structural note, and I told her so because credit is credit. She accepted the acknowledgement without warmth and moved on. I noticed things about her on Thursday that I hadn't had the right angle to notice Wednesday. She photographed everything not casually, with her phone held up the way people photograph something beautiful or interesting, but methodically working from one corner of each room to the next, in overlapping frames. She opened the built-in cabinet in the hallway and photographed the interior dimensions. She stood at the window in the primary bedroom and photographed the view, and she pulled out her phone twice to type something, not a text message, something longer in an application that showed a grid of columns, a spreadsheet. She was logging something as she walked through the apartment, and whatever she was logging, she did it carefully, the way you log things you plan to refer back to. At 3:15, she was in the living room on another call, her back to me. Her voice low enough that I couldn't make out words from the kitchen where I was reviewing the lighting specs with Sean. But I caught her laugh, easy, warm, relaxed completely, unlike the controlled, measured tone she used when speaking to me or Marcus. Whoever was on the other end of that call got a different person than the one who'd come to check on hardware pulls. I noted that. The way I had always noted the things on a job site that didn't quite line up, the hairline crack that shouldn't be there, the seam that was off by a fraction, but off in a direction that suggested something deeper. In 42 years of construction, I had learned that the small things that don't fit are never actually small. They are the first visible sign of something hidden underneath. She left at 3:40 without saying goodbye to anyone, except the building manager she passed in the lobby, whose name she apparently knew. That evening I sat at Margaret's table with a cup of tea I didn't drink, and turned the day over in my mind the way you turn a board over to check the grain on the other side. I wasn't thinking about the hardware pulls. I was thinking about the spreadsheet, about the photographs taken from corner to corner, about the laugh that was nothing like her voice. I picked up my phone and almost called Daniel to ask casually whether his girlfriend, he'd mentioned a girlfriend, Lauren, something maybe 6 months ago, a brief mention that hadn't led to details, had any connection to real estate. I put their phone back down. I didn't want to ask questions I couldn't explain without sounding like a man looking for trouble. But I thought about that spreadsheet for a long time before I slept. The second week, I stopped counting her visits and started counting her questions. There's a difference between someone who comes to check on their home and someone who comes to study it. A homeowner notices the light. They run their hand along the countertop. They stand in the bedroom doorway and picture where the furniture will go. Lauren Carter did none of those things. She moved through Unit 2401 the way an auditor moves through a balance sheet, efficiently, purposefully looking for numbers that don't reconcile. On Monday, she cornered me near the utility closet, while Marcus was sanding in the back hallway, the machine loud enough to swallow conversation from 10 feet away. She asked me about load-bearing capacity on the main terrace, how much weight per square foot the structural design allowed. I told her that information would be in the building's engineering file with the management office, not in my finish-out specs. Her jaw tightened a fraction. "Ballpark it for me," she said. "I don't ballpark structural load," I said. "Not on a 24th floor terrace. That's how people get hurt." She didn't like that answer. She wrote something in her phone, that spreadsheet again, columns and rows, and moved on to the second bedroom without acknowledging what I'd said. Tuesday, she came twice. The first visit was mid-morning, brisk and businesslike, a list of adjustments to the lighting temperature in the primary bath. The second was late afternoon, and she wasn't checking on the work at all. She stood at the living room window for 11 minutes, I know, because I was watching the clock while pretending to review specs, and photographed the view in a slow, deliberate arc from north to east to south. Not the sunset, the surrounding buildings, the block below, the street grid. "You photographing for the listing?" Marcus asked her, his voice friendly, genuinely curious. He'd worked enough high-end properties to know that owners sometimes documented everything before move-in. She glanced at him the way you glance at a piece of furniture that has unexpectedly made a noise. "Personal reference," she said, and turned back to the window. Marcus looked at me with his eyebrows raised halfway up his forehead. I gave him a microscopic shake of my head. "Keep working," Wednesday afternoon, she asked me about comparable sales in the building. My chest tightened the moment the words left her mouth, not dramatically. Not the way it does when something shocks you, but the slow, compressing tightness of a man who has been in enough rooms to know when a question doesn't belong there. I'm a contractor, I said, keeping my voice as level as a spirit level. I pour foundations and hang doors. The sales office is on the second floor. They can tell you what 2318 sold for last spring. I already know what 2318 sold for, she said. She let that sit there between us for exactly 3 seconds, then turned and went to check the closet shelving in the guest room. I went back to my clipboard. My hands were steady. My mind was running at about 300 miles an hour. A person who already knows the comparable sales in a building isn't shopping. They're positioning. Thursday came and went without incident. Lauren arrived, corrected 2 things that didn't need correcting, and left in under 30 minutes. But Friday afternoon put ice in my blood in a way I hadn't felt since the winter Margaret got her diagnosis. I was loading equipment into my truck in the parking structure on the second basement level, the kind of concrete cavern that swallows sound and spits it back at you distorted. My back was to the ramp when I heard heels on concrete, a sound that carries in a parking garage the way nothing else does. I recognized her pace. Quick, purposeful, the rhythm of someone who moves through the world like they own whatever floor they're standing on. I kept loading. She didn't see me. I was behind the open tailgate of my truck, just another gray-haired man handling equipment in the dim light of a parking structure. Invisible. I had gotten very used to being invisible around her. Her voice carried clearly off the concrete walls. She was on the phone, her tone warm and conspiratorial, the voice I'd heard her use once before on that other call, the one that sounded nothing like the voice she used to ask me about load capacities. "You already told you, Mom, it's better than I expected. The finishes are incredible." A pause. Then, no, not just the apartment. The whole picture. Daniel talked to me last month about the Oak Park house, the parcels on the north side. Mom, the man built half of Illinois. He's sitting on more than Daniel even realizes. My hand stopped on the door handle of my truck. Every muscle in my body went absolutely rigid. Just need the timing to be right. Once we're married, everything shifts naturally. That's how it works. You don't grab Mom, you position. Another pause, a short laugh. He doesn't know yet. He won't. He trusts Daniel completely, and Daniel trusts me. The footsteps moved away. An elevator door chimed and swallowed her voice whole. I stood in that parking garage with my hand on the door handle, and my heart hammering so hard I could feel it in my back teeth. Oak Park. The parcels on the north side. He doesn't know yet. He was me. I made myself count to 30 before I moved. Then I closed the truck door, walked to the driver's side, and sat behind the wheel with both hands in my lap, because I didn't trust them on the steering wheel yet. My breath was coming in short, shallow pulls that fogged the windshield. I pressed my palms flat against my thighs and forced myself to breathe like a man who had not just heard his entire life described as an asset portfolio. I drove home on the expressway with both hands at 10 and 2, and did not exceed the speed limit once. I spent the weekend telling myself it was coincidence. Chicago has 1,000 Oak Parks, not literally, but close enough when you're trying to talk yourself down from the edge of something terrifying. Miller was one of the most common surnames in the Midwest. Daniel had probably mentioned his father to Lauren the way young people mention their parents in passing, without detail, a background figure in a story she didn't care about. The woman in that parking garage could have been talking about any man who owned property in Oak Park. She could have been talking about her own father for all I knew. I said all of this to myself at Margaret's kitchen table Friday night. I said it again Saturday morning while I raked leaves in the front yard. I said it one more time Sunday evening while I reheated soup I'd made 3 days ago and hadn't finished. By Monday morning, I didn't believe a single word of it anymore. I arrived at Harlow Tower at 6:55 and went straight to my job bag, a worn canvas duffel that had traveled to more job sites than I could count, that Margaret had patched twice with iron-on denim because I refused to replace it. Inside, beneath the measuring tape and the site binder, was my copy of the owner contract for Unit 2401. I spread it flat on the kitchen island, the one Marcus and I had spent 4 hours installing the week before, cool white quartz that caught the morning light off the lake, and read through it with the kind of attention I hadn't given a document since the year I nearly signed a materials contract with a fraudulent supplier, and Robert caught the discrepancy at the last minute. Client name D. Miller. Contact number listed on page 3 in the field marked primary owner phone. I stared at that number for a long time. Then I pulled my personal cell phone from my chest pocket and opened my contacts. My hands were shaking. Not trembling, shaking the way they shook the morning the hospital called about Margaret, a deep, involuntary vibration that started somewhere near my sternum and worked its way outward. I scrolled to D in my contacts and found the entry I'd created 31 years ago when Daniel was 4 years old and I'd bought him his first toy phone and made a game of teaching him our home number. I'd updated it 6 times since then, new area codes, new cities, new phones. But I had never changed the name in my contacts. It still read the way I'd originally typed it, Daniel, my son. The number on the contract matched the number on my screen digit for digit. I put both phones face down on the quartz countertop. I pressed both palms flat against the cool stone and breathed through my nose for 10 full seconds. Because if I didn't, I was genuinely afraid my legs were going to give out under me. The door to Unit 2401 was open behind me. The building hummed with early morning quiet, the distant sound of a service elevator, the low mechanical breath of the HVAC system I'd helped configure last week. The floors I'd supervised Marcus sanding were beautiful now, a warm honey brown that caught the light and threw it back in long, even stripes. I had spent 3 weeks building my son's home. I had carried materials through his front door. I had made decisions about where his lights would sit, and how his closets would be configured, and what temperature the glow above his bathroom mirror would cast at 6 in the morning when he was standing there getting ready for work. And the woman who had been coming here every day, the woman who had called me the worker, who had photographed the surrounding buildings from his living room window, who had told her mother on a phone in a parking garage that she was positioning herself to control everything my son didn't even know I owned. She was going to marry him. Mr. Miller. Marcus's voice came from the hallway, cautious in the way that voices get when a man they respect is standing in a room looking like something has broken. I turned around. My face must have been doing something I wasn't aware of because Marcus took a half step back and his broad forehead creased with concern. "You all right?" he said. "You look like you just got some bad news." I picked up the site binder. My hands had stopped shaking, not because the fear had passed, but because 42 years of job sites had trained my body to perform competence, whether I felt it or not. "I'm fine," I said. "Let's go over today's sequence." Marcus studied me for another 2 seconds, with the steady, unhurried gaze of a man who has worked alongside enough people to know the difference between fine and functional. Then he nodded once and let it go. That's the thing about men who work with their hands for a living. They understand that sometimes you push through because the job requires it, and you deal with the rest later. At 10:27, she walked in. Lauren wore a charcoal blazer and carried her coffee and her phone the way she always did, moving toward the primary bedroom to check on the window treatment installation we'd finished Friday. I stayed near the kitchen. I kept my back partially to her. I was reading a spec sheet I had already read 4 times. Her phone rang. She answered on the second ring, and her voice shifted, that same liquid warmth I'd heard in the parking garage, nothing at all like the clipped efficiency she used with me. "Hey you." A pause. A small laugh. "I'm at the apartment. Yeah, everything's on track. Listen, I wanted to ask you, the second bedroom, I was thinking we convert it after the wedding. Make it a proper dressing room instead of an office. You never work from home anyway." Another pause. She was nodding at whatever he said. I know. But think about how much more functional it would be. We can talk about it tonight." A beat. "Okay, love you. Bye." She ended the call and walked back toward the kitchen, tapping something into her phone. I did not move from where I was standing. I did not turn around. My throat had closed to about the diameter of a drinking straw, and my heart was doing something irregular and insistent behind my ribs that I chose very deliberately to ignore. Because in the 14 seconds of that phone call, I had heard 3 things that stripped every last shred of coincidence from the situation. I had heard her say, the apartment, not my apartment, not the new place, but the apartment, the way you speak about something that belongs to someone else. I had heard her say, after the wedding, future tense, planned, decided. And I had heard in the easy familiarity of a man who answers on the second ring and laughs at a small joke before he says goodbye, the voice of my son. She walked past me toward the entry hall without glancing up from her phone. "The drapery hardware in the guest room needs to be recentered," she said to the air approximately 1 foot above my left shoulder. "The left bracket is off." "I'll take care of it," I said. My voice came out perfectly level. All those years of managing crews through crises, supply failures, structural surprises, weather that destroyed 3 weeks of work overnight, had given me a voice that could say reasonable things while the rest of me was coming apart at the seams. She left at 10:51. I know the exact time because I checked my watch the moment the elevator doors closed, the way you check a clock when you need something concrete to hold on to. Then I walked to the window, the one with the long view north toward the neighborhood, where I had raised my son, the one Lauren had photographed from every angle 2 days ago. And I gripped the frame with both hands until my knuckles ached, and I let myself feel for exactly 60 seconds every terrible thing I now understood. After 60 seconds, I let go of the frame. I straightened my back, and I started thinking about what I was going to do next. I slept maybe 3 hours Thursday night. I lay in the dark on my side of the bed, always my side, always just my side now, and stared at the ceiling while the clock on Margaret's nightstand ticked through the small hours like it had somewhere important to be. By 4:30, I gave up. I made coffee, sat at the kitchen table, and wrote down every single thing I knew. Not impressions, not feelings, but facts. The spreadsheet, the photographs, the comparable sales she already knew. The parking garage, Oak Park, the parcels on the north side. He doesn't know yet. By 6 o'clock, I had filled 3 pages in the small notepad I kept by the phone. I looked at what I'd written, and my stomach turned over like a cold engine refusing to start. Then I put the notepad in my chest pocket, drove to Harlow Tower, and walked onto the job site with a face that gave away absolutely nothing. 42 years in construction. You learn to wear the work like armor. I came in early enough to have 20 minutes alone in Unit 2401 before Marcus arrived. I stood in the center of the living room and looked at what we'd built. The floors warm and finished, the light catching the grain in long, honey-colored streaks. The kitchen trim fitted so cleanly, you'd have to know what to look for to see the seams. I had put my hands on every surface in this apartment. I had made decisions that Daniel would live with for years without knowing who had made them. The thought sat in my chest, like a stone. Lauren arrived at 10:15. She moved through the entry hall without breaking stride, already talking. Not to me, not to Marcus, but into her phone held up near her ear with the ease of someone for whom conversation was a continuous background process. I know what I'm doing, Mom. I've been doing this for months. Her voice carried from the hall with a clarity that the open floor plan did nothing to muffle. Daniel trusts me completely. That's the whole point. She paused, listening, then made an impatient sound with her tongue. Mom, I'm not going to argue about this in the middle of a construction site. She rounded the corner into the kitchen, saw me crouched near the base cabinet checking a leveling issue with the toe kick, and didn't even break her sentence. She simply walked to the far window and turned her back. No, I'm not rushing anything. Rushing is how you make mistakes. Another pause. Then her voice dropped half a register, going from impatient to deliberate. I'm telling you, once we're married, the whole picture changes. Daniel already told me his father was planning to gift him the major assets eventually anyway. We just need to make sure the structure is right when it happens. The timing has to be ours, not his. My jaw clamped so hard I heard my back teeth creak. The timing has to be ours, not his. I picked up my level. I set it against the cabinet frame. The bubble was perfectly centered. I stared at that bubble like it was the only thing in the world that still made sense. Okay, Mom. I have to go. Her voice shifted back to normal, efficient, and controlled. I'll call you tonight. She tucked the phone away and turned to face the kitchen. The under-cabinet lighting, she said. Is it done? Finished Tuesday, I said. My voice came out steady as a plumb line. I don't know how. I want to see it in the evening light. I'll come back at 5. We'll be off-site by 4:30, I said. I can leave the access code with the front desk. She considered this with the expression of someone calculating whether the inconvenience outweighed the benefit. Fine, she said, and moved toward the hallway. She was almost to the front door when she stopped and looked back at me with something that might have been on a different face, an attempt at warmth. The floors look good, she said. Better than I expected, actually. I felt something burn behind my eyes that had nothing to do with sawdust. Marcus built something worth being proud of, I said. He always does. She nodded once, as though filing that information in a category she wasn't sure was useful, and left. At 3 o'clock, she came back with a woman I had never seen before, mid-50s, well-dressed in a burgundy wool coat, hair cut sharply at the jaw. They walked in together with the easy synchronization of people who had been having the same conversation for years. This is what I was telling you about, Lauren said, sweeping her arm toward the window wall. The light in here in the afternoon is extraordinary. The woman, her mother, I understood immediately, something in the bone structure, and the particular way they both held their chins, turned slowly, taking in the room with calculating appreciation. It's beautiful, Lauren. It really is. And the location. Lauren crossed to the window and pointed south. Do you see that block? That's where the Bellwether project is going. 5 years from now, this whole corridor is going to look completely different. Susan Carter. I would learn her name later, but I knew her type immediately. The woman behind the woman, the one who had taught her daughter that the world was a chessboard, and other people were pieces moved to stand beside her daughter, and looked where Lauren was pointing. What about the father? Susan asked, her voice dropping just low enough that she thought it wouldn't carry. It carried. The Oak Park situation, is that still complicated? Lauren's chin lifted with a confidence that made my blood run cold. It won't be, she said. Everything is moving in the right order, Mom. I told you. Susan patted her daughter's arm with the satisfied expression of a woman whose plan is proceeding on schedule. "Good girl," she said softly. I was 17 feet away on my knees checking a floor register, and I heard every syllable as clearly as if they'd leaned down and spoken directly into my ear. My hands pressed flat against the hardwood floor, Margaret's voice came to me out of nowhere, clear and sharp as a bell. "Tom, when something frightens you this badly, that's exactly when you have to think most clearly." I pressed my palms harder against the floor and thought as clearly as I had ever thought in my life. Drove home from Harlow Tower that Friday evening. The long way, not because I was lost, but because I needed the extra 20 minutes inside the truck where nobody could see my face. By the time I pulled into the driveway in Oak Park, the maple in the front yard had gone dark red in the early evening light, the kind of red that Margaret used to photograph and I used to roll my eyes at. I sat in the truck and looked at it for a long time. Then I went inside, put the kettle on, and pulled out the notepad from my chest pocket. I had 3 pages from that morning. I added 2 more before the water boiled. Hi. Dad never told me the exact dollar value. Daniel had said maybe 8 months ago on one of our careful Sunday calls. I hadn't thought much of it at the time. He'd been telling Lauren about the family, the way you do when you're serious about someone. And he'd circled back to me in an almost apologetic way, the way he did whenever he felt the distance between us. But he built a lot. Half of Oak Park knows his name. He's got the house, the north side parcels, the retirement accounts. He's set, he earned it. He'd said it with pride. My chest ached so badly remembering it that I had to put my pen down and press my fist against my sternum until the feeling passed. My son had handed her a map. He'd done it out of love, out of pride, out of the simple human need to show the person you love that your family is worth knowing, and she had taken that map and turned it into a spreadsheet. I picked up the phone and called Robert. He answered on the second ring with his usual opener. "Tell me it's good news." "It isn't," I said. A pause. Then carefully. "How bad?" "I don't know yet," I said. "That's why I'm calling." I told him everything. I talked for 22 minutes straight, which is approximately 20 minutes longer than I normally talk on the phone about anything personal. Robert had known me since Ronald Reagan was president. He let me go without interrupting once, which told me he understood this was serious, in a way that ordinary problems weren't. When I finished, the line was quiet for a beat. Then Robert said, "Tom, are you absolutely certain the number on the contract matches Daniel's?" "Robert," I said, "I know my son's phone number." "Okay." His voice was different now, not the brisk, get-things-done Robert of the morning call, but the Robert who had sat with me at the hospital when Margaret got her diagnosis and hadn't said a single useless thing. "Okay, tell me what you need." I need to know who Lauren Carter is," I said. "Not who she says she is, who she actually is. Work history, financial history, any legal records that are public. Whatever you can find without crossing any lines." "I know people," Robert said. "I know you do. That's why I called you and not the phone book." "Tom." His voice tightened with something that sounded a lot like the particular anger of a man who wants to protect his friend and is restraining himself with effort. "Have you considered just calling Daniel tonight? Telling him what you heard?" I looked at the 2 fresh pages in my notepad. Then I looked at the photograph on the refrigerator, Daniel at 22 graduation day, standing between me and Margaret, with that ridiculous mortarboard tilted sideways, all 3 of us laughing at something I couldn't remember anymore. His hand on Margaret's shoulder, his face open and unguarded in a way it hadn't been since she died. And say what I said. That I overheard his fiancée talking about asset structures in a parking garage. That I think her spreadsheet is suspicious, Robert. This man is in love. He'll hear a worried old father who doesn't want to let go of his son. My voice came out rougher than I intended, scraped raw somewhere in the middle. Lauren has been building this for months. She'll have an answer for everything I say before I finish saying it. Robert breathed out slowly. So you need proof. I need proof, I said. Something he can hold in his hands and see for himself. Not my word against hers. Give me a week, Robert said. Maybe 10 days. Take what you need, I said. Do it right. After we hung up, I sat at Margaret's table with my notepad and my cold tea and looked at everything I'd written. 5 pages of facts, dates, times, exact words, the name of the spreadsheet application Lauren used on her phone, the direction she'd been pointing when she showed her mother the Bellwether development corridor. Everything documented, everything sourced, nothing assumed. I had built my career on the principle that a structure is only as strong as its documentation. Change orders in writing. Material specs in writing. Walkthroughs recorded and signed. I had watched a dozen contractors lose everything money reputation licenses because they'd trusted a handshake where they should have trusted a contract. This was no different. This was construction, just a different kind. I closed the notepad and put it in the drawer beneath the phone. The same drawer where Margaret had kept important papers for 31 years, right next to the instruction manual for a blender we no longer owned. Her handwriting was on a sticky note inside the drawer. Tom, don't lose the good stuff. I looked at that note for a long moment. Then I put the notepad inside and closed the drawer carefully, the way you close something you intend to open again very soon. I went back Tuesday with different eyes. Not the eyes of a contractor checking tile alignment or verifying that a cabinet pull sat 2 centimeters higher than last week. The eyes of a man who had spent a weekend writing 5 pages of facts into a notepad and still felt like he was only seeing the surface of something that went much deeper than he could yet measure. Marcus noticed immediately. He had worked beside me on and off for 11 years. He knew the difference between Thomas Miller reviewing a job site and Thomas Miller studying one. "You looking for something specific today?" he asked, handing me a coffee from the carrier he always brought on Tuesdays. Dark roast, no sugar. He'd learned my order the first week without asking. "Just being thorough," I said. He accepted that with a slow nod and went back to the trim work in the hallway. Marcus understood that some answers weren't answers, they were permission to stop asking. The apartment was in its final stage. The floors gleamed. The kitchen cabinetry was fully hardware-dressed, the pulls sitting at exactly the right height. The lighting system was configured and balanced, the kind of warm, layered glow that made expensive spaces feel lived in rather than displayed. I had done good work here. We all had. And I walked through it that Tuesday morning with a pride that tasted like ash in the back of my throat. Lauren arrived at 2 in the afternoon. She came in with her laptop bag over one shoulder and her phone in her hand, moving with the efficiency of someone who had a list of things to accomplish before 5 o'clock and intended to accomplish all of them. She sat up at the dining table, the one the building had staged temporarily for the walkthrough period, opened her laptop, and began working without preamble or greeting. I was checking the under-cabinet wiring in the kitchen, maybe 12 feet away, close enough to hear her keyboard, far enough that she registered me the way she always did as background. 20 minutes passed. Marcus came in to tell me the guest bathroom threshold needed a final bead of caulk before it was photo-ready. I walked with him to the back hallway, checked the threshold, confirmed the caulk spec, and sent him to get the right tube from the supply closet. On my way back through the living room, I passed behind the dining table. Lauren had stepped away from her laptop. I could hear her voice from the primary bedroom on the phone again. Something about a delivery confirmation for a piece of furniture. The laptop screen faced outward toward the window. The screen was on, and the file that was open on that screen was visible from 8 feet away, with the afternoon light coming off the lake, making everything on that monitor absolutely, undeniably clear. A spreadsheet. 3 columns wide, at least 15 rows deep, with a folder hierarchy visible in the sidebar. The folder at the top of that hierarchy was named in plain black text on a white background, exactly what I had suspected, and exactly what I had hoped I was wrong about. Future Miller Assets. The rows I could read from where I stood without taking a single step closer. Oak Park Residential Property Est. Value field, a number that was within $12,000 of what my last property assessment had returned. North side parcels, 2 entries, both with accurate square footage that Daniel could only have known from documents I'd shown him years ago. Retirement accounts, estimated range conservative and accurate. And at the bottom of the visible section, a row that made the hair on the back of my neck stand straight up, Harlow Tower Unit 2401 status field. Reading pending transfer confirmation. My vision went tight at the edges, the way it does when your blood pressure spikes. I had experienced that sensation exactly twice before in my life, once on a job site, when a scaffold failed and I caught a man before he fell 3 stories, and once in a hospital waiting room in November 3 years ago. Both times my body had understood that something irreversible was happening before my mind caught up. I turned. I walked back to the kitchen. I crouched down in front of the base cabinet and checked a measurement I had already confirmed twice that morning. My hands were rock steady. My heart was slamming against my ribs like it was trying to get out. She came back from the bedroom, 2 minutes later, sat down at the laptop, closed the spreadsheet, and opened something else. "The threshold in the guest bath," she said, without looking up. "Is that being addressed today?" "Today," I confirmed. "Good," she typed. "The walkthrough is Thursday. I want everything clean." "It'll be ready," I said. I left at 4:30 with Marcus and Pete. In the elevator, Marcus looked at me sideways. "You find what you were looking for?" he asked. My jaw tightened. "More than I wanted to," I said. He didn't ask anything else. The elevator opened into the lobby, and we walked out into the cold October air, and I breathed it in like a man who had been underwater and was only now remembering how lungs work. I drove to a gas station 3 blocks from Harlow Tower, parked in the lot, and sat for 15 minutes with the engine running, and both hands wrapped around the steering wheel. The heat came up through the vents, and I stared at the yellow, fluorescent glow of the gas station canopy and said out loud to nobody, "Okay, Margaret, I see it now. All of it." Then I pulled out my notepad and wrote down every word I had read on that screen before the details could blur at the edges. Property addresses, estimated values, status notations, the folder name in bold at the top. I wrote until my hand cramped. Then I drove home, ate nothing, and called Robert to tell him to move as fast as he reasonably could. For 3 weeks, I built my son's home with my own hands, and the woman who was planning to take it from him watched me work every single day without knowing who I really was. Before I tell you what happened the moment Daniel walked through that door, and she finally realized her mistake, drop a number in the comments right now. Any number. Just so I know you're still here with me. And a quick note before we continue the story ahead. Contains some dramatized elements crafted to illustrate a real and important truth. If that's not for you, no hard feelings. You can step away right now. But if you want to know what a father does when he has to choose between protecting his son and trusting him, stay with me. Friday afternoon, the elevator opened and Daniel walked in. My son. 35 years old, wearing a charcoal wool coat I didn't recognize, and carrying the slight forward lean he'd had since he was 8 years old, and perpetually in a hurry to get to whatever came next. His hair was shorter than the last time I'd seen him at Easter 5 months ago, a careful 2-hour lunch downtown that we had both been polite enough to call a good visit. I had approximately 4 seconds between the moment I saw him and the moment he saw me. I used those 4 seconds to decide I would say my name. Nothing more. I would let the situation breathe. Mr. Hayes. Daniel's voice crossed the room with the warm confusion of a man who recognizes a face but can't place the context. He moved toward me with his hand already extended, the instinctive good manners Margaret had drilled into him from the time he could shake hands without pumping too hard. You're the site supervisor." I took his hand. Felt his grip firm, the same grip I'd taught him. My throat tightened with a pressure I had not anticipated and could not entirely control. "I am," I said. "Thomas Miller." Daniel's face went through 3 expressions in under 2 seconds. Recognition, confusion, something that cracked open across his features like a fault line, shifting, a sudden lurching joy mixed with something that looked painfully close to guilt. "Dad." His voice dropped to almost nothing on the word. "Dad, what? How are you?" "Robert called me," I said. "3 weeks ago, you needed a supervisor. I was available." His grip on my hand tightened before he released it. His eyes were bright, not tears, not quite, but the particular sheen that comes when a man has been holding something carefully for a long time and suddenly doesn't have to anymore. "I didn't know," he said. "I had no idea it was you. Lauren manages all the contractor paperwork. I never saw the supervisor name on anything. I just signed where she told me to sign." He stopped. Looked around the apartment, really looked at it the way he hadn't had time to in the doorway. "Dad, it looks incredible. Marcus does good work," I said, which was true, and also bought me 4 more seconds, while Daniel turned in a slow circle, taking in the floors, the light, the trim. His face was open in a way I hadn't seen in years, and it hurt me somewhere deep and specific to look at it. Lauren came out of the primary bedroom. I watched it happen. The moment she stepped into the living room, and her eyes found Daniel, warm, delighted, moving toward him, and then tracked left, and found me still standing where Daniel had left me, holding my sight binder in one hand. The sequence took less than 2 seconds. Delight, recognition, recalibration, and then, and I will never forget this for as long as I live, the smile that replaced all of it. Not the controlled, efficient expression she wore when she was directing me about hardware pulls. Not the warm, liquid voice I'd heard on the phone. Something new. Something she had manufactured in under 2 seconds from raw materials and installed on her face like a finish coat over damaged drywall. "Oh my God." She crossed the room with her arms open, moving toward me with the warm momentum of a woman greeting someone she'd been hoping to see. "You're Daniel's father. You're the one who's been doing all of this." She gestured around the apartment with an admiration so perfectly calibrated it made my skin crawl. "I had no idea. I feel terrible. I would have introduced myself properly from the beginning if I'd known." She was close enough now that I could see her eyes clearly. They were assessing me with an intensity completely at odds with the warmth radiating off the rest of her face. A builder reads a structure from the foundation up. You learn to see what's underneath the finish. "No harm done," I said. My voice was a wall. Smooth, even, gave nothing away. "Babe." She turned to Daniel with an expression of soft exasperation. "Why didn't you tell me your dad was the supervisor? I've been talking to him for 3 weeks." She shook her head with a laugh that was almost perfect. "I must have seemed so rude." Daniel blinked. I didn't know he was the supervisor either. I just found out the contract was under his name when Robert... Well, it all worked out beautifully. She reached out and touched my arm, a brief proprietary contact that she made look like warmth. Babe, your dad built us something incredible. Look at these floors. Daniel looked at me with something in his eyes that was half apology and half something I couldn't name yet. Are you Dad? Are you okay? You've been here this whole time and you never... It was a job, I said. I did the job. We stood there, the three of us, in the apartment I had spent 3 weeks building, in the apartment that appeared in a spreadsheet, under a folder called Future Miller Assets, and I watched Lauren Carter perform the role of delighted future daughter-in-law with a fluency that would have convinced anyone who hadn't seen her call me the worker 14 days ago. Babe, we should take your dad to dinner, she said, squeezing Daniel's arm and looking at me with eyes that held the warmth of a professionally lit showroom. Tonight, if he's free. I want to hear everything about how this came together. Daniel's face lit up genuinely, unguardedly, the way it used to when he was young enough that good things could still surprise him. Dad, you free tonight? My chest ached with a pain so precise and particular it had its own address. I looked at my son's open, hopeful face. Then I looked at Lauren, standing beside him, with her hand on his arm, and her smile aimed at me like a searchlight. Rain check, I said. I've got an early morning. On the drive home, Daniel called me. He sounded happier than he had in months, bright and warm and slightly out of breath, the way people get when something they'd been anxious about has resolved better than expected. She really likes you, Dad, he said. Lauren said you two got along great. I watched the expressway lights streak past overhead. That's good to hear, I said. I'm glad you took the job. I'm glad it was you. His voice cracked slightly on the last word, just enough that I heard it, and I think he heard it too because he cleared his throat quickly. We should get dinner. Soon. For real. Soon, I said. Yes. After we hung up, I sat in the driveway in Oak Park for a long time, with the engine off and the cold settling in around the truck. A woman who could dismantle herself and rebuild into a different person in under 2 seconds wasn't just adaptable. She was practiced. She had done this before the pivot, the warmth, the seamless installation of a new persona over the old one. And my son thought she liked me. That night, I opened the drawer where I keep the things I don't talk about. Every man has a drawer like that. Margaret used to call it my serious drawer, the one in the oak cabinet beside the refrigerator. The one with the combination lock she never once asked me to open because she trusted me the same way you trust a foundation completely, and without needing to inspect it every season. Inside that drawer were the documents that said what I actually meant when ordinary words weren't adequate to the situation. My will, the deed to the Oak Park house, the insurance policies, and at the very back in a manila envelope with the return address of a real estate development firm on Michigan Avenue, the paperwork I had been sitting on for 3 years. I carried the envelope to the kitchen table, poured 2 fingers of bourbon I didn't intend to drink more than once, and spread the contents out under the light. 3 years ago, Robert had called me about an opportunity, a pre-development stake in a residential tower being planned for the North Loop. The project was called Harlow Tower. The developer was offering early investors the option to purchase specific units at pre-construction pricing in exchange for capital commitments during the planning phase. Robert knew the lead architect personally. The numbers were sound. I had put in the capital for Unit 2401 before the foundation was poured. I had done it because of something Margaret said the December before she got sick, sitting right here at this table with Christmas cards spread out around her and a cup of tea gone cold at her elbow. Daniel had just called to say he'd been promoted, and she'd hung up the phone with her eyes wet with pride and said, "Tom, we need to do something real for him. Not a check. Something that says we see who he's becoming." I'd thought about it for 3 months. Then I'd called Robert. The plan was simple, and I had thought beautiful. Daniel would believe he was purchasing the unit through a standard real estate transaction. The developer's sales office would handle the paperwork. The pricing would reflect what he'd been quoted, and after the wedding, after he and his wife had moved in and settled, I would tell him the truth. That the down payment he'd made had come back to him. That the unit was already fully paid. That it was a gift from his mother and me, a place to build a life in, without the weight of a mortgage pressing down on the first years of a marriage. Margaret had loved the idea. She had actually clapped her hands when I told her, which she only did for things she considered genuinely wonderful. I sat at the table and looked at the transfer documents, the papers I would sign after Daniel's wedding, the ones that would move the title into his name free and clear. They were filled out in my handwriting except for the signature line and the date. I had been ready for 2 years. I had been waiting for the right moment, and now the woman he intended to marry had a spreadsheet with this unit listed under future Miller assets, with a status notation reading pending transfer confirmation. My hand came down flat on the table with a crack that made the bourbon glass jump. The pain shot up my palm, and I welcomed it. It was clean and honest in a way that nothing else in the past 2 weeks had been. "What do I do, Margaret?" My voice came out rough, scraped, raw at the edges. "What do I do with this?" The kitchen gave me nothing back but the tick of the clock above the stove and the distant sound of a car passing on the street outside. I pressed the heel of my hand against my eye socket and held it there until the burning stopped. She had gotten within arm's reach of this document without knowing it existed. She had put my son's home, a gift from his dead mother, into a column of assets she was planning to control. And Daniel was out there somewhere in the city right now, happy, telling someone that dinner with his father had gone beautifully. I called Robert at 9:45. He answered on the first ring, which meant he'd been expecting the call. "Tell me you've got something," I said. "Working on it," he said. "Tom, I need you to hear something. Whatever I find, and I'm going to find something, I can already tell you that much. You cannot go to Daniel with a feeling. You understand me? He's in love. Love makes people stupid, and it makes them loyal in the wrong direction. You need paper. You need dates and names and documentation he cannot talk himself around." "I know," I said. "Do you?" His voice was firm in the way that only old friends can be firm, not unkind, just unwilling to let me slide. "Because I know you, Tom Miller. I know what you look like when you're about to do something fast instead of something smart." I looked down at the transfer documents on the table. At Margaret's handwriting in the margins, notes she'd made in the planning stage, questions about the unit's orientation and whether the guest room would get morning light. Her handwriting still here, still hers. "I'll wait," I said. But Robert moved fast. "Give me the week," he said. "Don't do anything until I call." After we hung up, I put the transfer documents back in the manila envelope, put the envelope in the serious drawer, and locked it. Then I sat at the table with the untouched bourbon until after midnight, listening to the house and thinking about the kind of patience that costs you something real to maintain. The apartment was done. I did the final supervisor walkthrough on a Tuesday morning in early November with Marcus beside me, and a punch list that had exactly 4 items on it, all minor, all addressed by noon. The floors were flawless. The lighting was calibrated. The kitchen hardware gleamed. Everything I had come here to do was finished, and finished well, and I felt the particular satisfaction of completed craftsmanship, fighting a losing battle against everything else I was carrying. Good job, I told Marcus, and I meant it in every direction. He looked around the apartment with the expression of a man who takes genuine pride in his work and doesn't need to perform it. Best penthouse I've finished in 15 years, he said. Whoever lives here is lucky. I didn't answer that. I shook his hand, signed off on the completion log, a formal document required by the building management confirming that all contracted work had been performed to specification, and handed over the site key fob to the building coordinator. Technically, my involvement with Unit 2401 was concluded. Contractually, I had no further reason to be here. I told myself I was relieved. I told myself it on the elevator down and in the lobby and in the truck on the way home. I told myself it 3 times before I stopped believing it. 2 days later, Thursday afternoon, Lauren came back. She came without Daniel, without her mother, without the brisk efficiency of a woman checking a punch list. She came with a leather portfolio tucked under one arm, and the measured calm of someone who had rehearsed what she intended to say on the way over. I knew that particular calm. I had worn it myself on job sites when I was delivering news I didn't want to deliver. The building coordinator had given her access for a measurement appointment. She'd told the front desk she needed to confirm furniture dimensions before delivery. That was the stated reason. I was there because I'd come back under the pretense of a post-completion check on the lighting calibration, which was within my contractual rights for 30 days after handover. She walked in and found me near the kitchen island, and for 1/2 second, her composure flickered a barely perceptible tightening around the eyes that she smoothed over so quickly I might have imagined it if I hadn't been watching for exactly that. "I didn't know you'd be here today," she said, setting the portfolio on the dining table with the careful placement of someone putting down something valuable. "Post-completion lighting check," I said. "Standard 30-day clause in the supervisor contract, making sure the calibration holds after the first thermal cycle in the space." She nodded as though this was perfectly reasonable, which it was, and moved toward the primary bedroom with a tape measure in hand. I went back to the lighting panel near the entry hall. She was in the bedroom for 8 minutes. When she came back out, she sat at the dining table, opened the portfolio, and began reviewing documents. I moved to the kitchen to check the under-cabinet lighting temperature. At 3:40, she stood up and walked toward the kitchen with the portfolio in her hand, open to a specific page held at an angle that managed to appear casual while ensuring the contents faced toward me. "I wanted to ask you something," she said. Her voice was warm, carefully warm, the warmth of someone who had turned the dial to exactly the right setting. "Daniel and I have been working with an attorney on our financial planning, making sure everything is organized before the wedding. Part of that involves setting up a joint financial structure." She placed the portfolio on the counter between us, open to the first document. "This is a financial power of attorney. It authorizes Daniel to manage financial decisions on your behalf if you're ever unavailable or need assistance. It's completely standard for families." I looked at the document without touching it. A financial power of attorney under Illinois law, this document would grant Daniel as my designated agent the legal authority to make financial decisions in my name. Sign contracts, access accounts, execute property transactions. It was not in itself a predatory document. In the right hands between people who trusted each other, it was a reasonable estate planning tool. In the wrong hands, it was a key to every lock I owned. And this one? She continued, turning to the next page with the smooth efficiency of a woman who had given this presentation before. "Is a property management authorization. It simply names Daniel as the authorized contact for your properties, Oak Park, the North Side parcels, so that if there are decisions that need to be made quickly, he can act without waiting for you to be available." I looked at that page. In the field for the property owner's signature, my name was already printed in clean black type. Thomas Edward Miller. Below it, a line. Waiting. My jaw ached from holding it level. My hands resting on the counter were absolutely still through a sustained act of will that cost me more than I will ever admit to another living person. Lauren, I said, and my voice came out with the even-measured quality of poured concrete, smooth on the surface, solid all the way through. Who prepared these documents? She met my eyes with a steadiness that I recognized as performance rather than confidence. There was a difference, and 42 years of reading people on job sites had taught me to see it. Our attorney, she said. He specializes in family estate planning. He said this kind of structure is very common for families with multi-generational assets. Has Daniel reviewed these specific pages? A pause. Barely a beat. We've discussed the overall framework. That was not a yes. I appreciate you bringing these, I said. I did not reach for the portfolio. I'll want to have my own attorney review anything I'm asked to sign. I'm sure you understand, it's just good practice. Her chin lifted 2 degrees. The warmth in her expression didn't disappear. It recalibrated the way a thermostat adjusts. Of course, she said. Take all the time you need. She closed the portfolio. She picked it up. She smiled at me with her whole face the way a person smiles when they are deciding their next move and don't want you to see them deciding. The furniture delivery is Saturday, she said. I hope you'll come see it once it's all in. You worked so hard on this space. I might do that, I said. She left at 4:15. I stood at the kitchen counter with my hands pressed flat on the cold quartz and counted backward from 50. At 23, I stopped counting and picked up my phone and called Robert. She brought papers to the apartment today, I said the moment he answered. A financial power of attorney and a property management authorization. My name was already printed on the signature lines. Robert said a word that Margaret would not have approved of. Then, Tom, how close are you to calling Daniel right now? Closer than yesterday, I said, but not yet. Good. His voice sharpened with urgency. Because I found something. I need 2 more days to confirm it. Can you give me 2 more days? My chest tightened with a feeling that was 1 part dread and 2 parts something that might have been in another context relief. What did you find? 2 more days, he said. Then you'll know everything I know. I looked out the window at Lake Michigan, gray and vast under the November sky, and said, 2 days, Robert, not 3. Daniel called on a Wednesday evening and suggested dinner just the 3 of us. He said, his voice carrying that careful hopefulness of a man trying to build something he's afraid might be fragile. Lauren wants to get to know you properly, Dad, he said. Not a job site, an actual dinner. She picked a place near the river, Italian good food, relaxed. You'll like it. My throat tightened at the word properly, because it implied that what had come before, 3 weeks of her calling me the worker and cataloging my assets into a spreadsheet, had been improper, which it had been, but not in the way Daniel understood. What time? I said. 7, Thursday. I'll be there, I said. I spent Thursday afternoon sitting at Margaret's table with a legal pad, writing down exactly what I needed to observe at dinner and exactly what I needed to avoid saying. By 6 o'clock, I had a list on one side and a set of rules on the other. The rules were simple: listen more than you speak, don't reveal what you know, and watch how she moves when Daniel is watching her versus when he isn't. The restaurant was called Carmine's Small Warm, the kind of place with red checkered tablecloths and bread that arrives without being asked. Daniel was already there when I walked in, standing near the hostess stand, with his coat still on his face, breaking into a genuine smile when he saw me. that made my chest clench with something between love and grief. Dad. He crossed the space between us and pulled me into a hug, not the brief, obligatory hug of a dutiful son, but the kind with actual pressure behind it, the kind that says I missed you, and I'm not sure how to say it any other way. My eyes stung. I held on for exactly as long as he did, and not 1 second less. "You look good," I told him, and I meant it. He did look good, rested, happy, the particular glow of a man whose life is going the way he planned. "Say to Lauren's parking," he said. "She'll be 2 minutes. Come on, I got us a good table." We sat in the corner booth, Daniel's choice made specifically because he knew I liked to see the room. He had remembered that from childhood, from 100 family dinners at 100 restaurants, where I always angled for the wall seat. The fact that he remembered squeezed something in my chest so hard, I had to take a slow breath before I could speak. "How's the apartment?" I asked. "Incredible," he said, leaning forward with the enthusiasm he got when something genuinely excited him. "Dad, the floors, every time I walk in, I just stop and look at them. Marcus did something special with that grain pattern. He's the best Finnish carpenter I've ever worked with," I said. "Bar none." "I want to have you over," Daniel said. "Properly. Soon. Once we're settled." He hesitated. I know we've lost some time, Dad. I'm sorry about that." The apology hit me somewhere undefended. My throat worked. "We've both been figuring out how to do this without your mother," I said. "There's no rule book for it." Daniel's jaw tightened for a moment the way it did when he was fighting something back. "No," he said. "There isn't." Lauren arrived in a rush of cold air and confidence, her coat already half unbuttoned, her smile aimed at our table from 6 feet away with the warmth of stadium lighting. She slid into the booth beside Daniel and reached across to squeeze my hand. "I'm so glad we're doing this," she said. "A real dinner. Finally." She ordered the salmon. Daniel ordered the pasta he'd been ordering at Italian restaurants since he was 12 years old. I ordered chicken and watched. For the first 40 minutes, the performance was impeccable. She asked me about my years in construction, specific questions. Good questions, the kind that required real answers, and made the person being asked feel genuinely heard. She laughed at the right moments. She touched Daniel's arm when she spoke about their future together in a way that looked effortlessly affectionate. And then somewhere between the salad and the entree, she began. "Daniel told me you drive yourself everywhere still," she said, her voice perfectly pleasant. Her head tilted at an angle that said concern rather than challenge. "All the way downtown and back. That's a lot, especially in winter." "I've been driving Chicago winters for 40 years, I said. "Of course." She smiled. "I just think about the ice. Daniel worries too." She glanced at him with an expression of shared, loving concern. Daniel looked at me with a small furrow between his brows. "Do you want me to set you up with a car service?" "It's not a big deal." "I don't need a car service," I said pleasantly. Lauren nodded, accepting this, and moved on with the seamlessness of a woman who had learned that a single stone dropped in still water creates ripples long after the stone has sunk. "And the properties," she said, reaching for her wine glass. "Oak Park, the North Side lots. That's a lot to manage solo, especially the tax filings in January." I looked at her over my water glass. "I have an accountant," I said. "Same one for 23 years. That's wonderful," she said warmly. "It's just Daniel mentioned that you've been handling everything yourself since Margaret passed. That's such a heavy load for one person." She turned to Daniel with soft eyes. Don't you think it might give you both some peace of mind to have a more formal structure? Someone authorized to step in if your dad ever needs it. And there it was, dressed in cashmere and delivered over a candlelit dinner table, but there it was, the same conversation as the leather portfolio on the kitchen counter. The same document with my name pre-printed on the signature line, just spoken aloud this time, where Daniel could hear it and agree. Daniel looked at me with the expression of a man who has just been handed a reasonable suggestion and is trying to assess whether it's reasonable. Dad, she might have a point. We could just— I appreciate the thought, I said, cutting across him gently but completely. I'll discuss it with my attorney when the time comes. I picked up my fork. Now tell me about Thanksgiving. Are you two staying in the city? The pivot worked. Daniel followed it because he was a good son, and he understood on some level that the conversation had reached a wall. Lauren followed it too gracefully, without visible frustration, the way water moves around an obstacle without ever stopping. But on the drive home, my hands gripped the steering wheel at 10 and 2 and did not loosen for 40 minutes. Because I had just watched her do it in real time, build the architecture of doubt in Daniel's mind about my ability to manage my own affairs using language so warm and reasonable that even I, who knew exactly what she was doing, had felt the faint pull of it. One dinner. One carefully placed sentence. And Daniel had almost agreed. That was how bricks were laid. One at a time. Until the wall was done and the man inside couldn't see the daylight anymore. I called Robert the morning after that dinner and told him what had happened at Carmine's. He listened without interrupting a discipline he'd developed over decades of business negotiations, the ability to absorb information without reacting to it until he had all of it. When I finished, he said, "She's moving faster." "Yes," I said. "She knows I won't sign the papers willingly. She's working on Daniel now. Then we work faster too." His voice had the clipped decisiveness I recognized from the old days, from job sites where something had gone wrong, and standing around discussing it was exactly the wrong response. "Tom, I need you to do something uncomfortable." "Tell me." "Keep going to dinner. Keep taking the calls. Keep being the cooperative father-in-law who has no idea what she's doing." A pause. "Can you do that?" My jaw ached at the thought of it. "I've been doing it for 6 weeks already," I said. "Then 6 more days won't kill you." He softened slightly. "I've got a line on something, Tom. Something from before Daniel. I need a few more days to confirm it. If it's what I think it is, we won't need feelings and impressions, we'll have a pattern. A documented, confirmable pattern." "How many days?" I said. "A week. Maybe 10 days. I looked at the notepad on the table, Margaret's recipe book. Now 40 pages deep with dates and quotes and behavioral observations documented in my handwriting. "Fine," I said. 1 week. That afternoon, I met Robert at his office, and we sat across from each other with coffee going cold between us and built a system. Not a confrontation, a system. The difference between those two things was the difference between tearing down a wall and understanding its load-bearing function before you touch it. "You document everything," Robert said, tapping the table for emphasis. "Every interaction. Date, time, exact words. Not your interpretation, her exact words. If she says something about your properties, you write it down the moment you're alone. If she produces any document, you note the document type, the date, the specific fields that involved your name or your assets." "Already doing it," I said. "Good. Now." He leaned forward. "The penthouse. You still have 30-day post-completion access rights under your supervisor contract. Use them. Not to snoop, to legitimately verify the lighting calibration and the floor finishing response to the first heating season. Those are real technical checks. Go back once more, walk the space, and trust your eyes. I drove to Harlow Tower that evening at 6 o'clock, after hours when the building was quiet, and Lauren would have no reason to be there. The building coordinator let me in under the post-completion clause without question. I took the elevator to the 24th floor and let myself into Unit 2401. The apartment was different now. Furnished in the early stages, a few pieces moved in, but not yet fully arranged. A sofa still in its delivery wrapping along one edge. Boxes stacked in the second bedroom. But the space itself, the bones of it, the floors and the light and the angles I had spent 3 weeks perfecting those were unchanged. I walked through slowly. I checked the lighting panels with a calibration tool I'd brought from my kit, legitimate, documented, signed into the building log. The calibration was holding exactly as set. The floors showed no stress response from the first weeks of occupancy heating. Everything I had built was performing exactly as designed. I stood at the living room window for a moment and looked out at the city, the lake dark and enormous to the east. The grid of streetlights spreading west into neighborhoods I'd driven through my whole life. Somewhere out there, Daniel was in his office or at his apartment or at a dinner I wasn't invited to. Somewhere out there, Lauren Carter was managing her timeline with the patience of someone who believed she had already won. I pressed my palm flat against the cold glass and felt the temperature of it travel up my arm. "Not yet," I said to the city, to the window, to whatever was listening. "Not yet, you haven't." Back at Oak Park that night, I opened Margaret's recipe book and added 3 more pages. I wrote down the exact sequence of Lauren's remarks at Carmine's, the car service suggestion first, the property management second, the authorization structure third. 3 steps each, building on the last, each delivered with warmth that made them sound like care rather than the architecture of control they actually were. Then I wrote something in the margin that I hadn't planned to write. I wrote, "She is good at this. Better than anyone I have encountered in 40 years of dealing with difficult people. Which means she has had practice. Robert needs to find the practice." I underlined the last sentence twice. Then I closed the book, put it in Margaret's drawer, and went to bed. For the first time in weeks, I slept more than 4 hours. Not because things were better, because I had a plan. And in my experience, a man with a plan, even an incomplete one, even one built on patience and documentation rather than action, sleeps better than a man with only fear. Robert called on a Tuesday morning in the first week of December and said 4 words I hadn't been expecting, delivered in the flat, measured voice he reserved for information that deserved to be handled carefully. "Tom, she's done this before." The coffee mug in my hand stopped moving halfway to my mouth. I set it on the counter with a sound that was too loud for the quiet kitchen and said, "Tell me everything, not on the phone. I'm coming to you." But I was going to say the same thing, he said. 9:30. I'll have it all laid out. I was at his Michigan Avenue office by 9:15, still in my coat, when he started talking, because Robert Hayes had known me long enough to understand that when I needed information, I needed it immediately and in full, not parceled out with courtesy pauses. He was standing at his whiteboard when I walked in. Not sitting, standing with notes in 2 colors of marker and a printed summary on the desk that he'd prepared with the methodical thoroughness of a man who'd spent his career making sure the details held up under scrutiny. 5 years ago, he said, uncapping the red marker. A man named Richard Webb, 61 years old at the time. Owned a residential renovation company out of Naperville, solid business, 22 years, established good reputation in the western suburbs. He met Lauren Carter at a fundraising dinner for a children's hospital in the Gold Coast. They were introduced by a mutual acquaintance. Robert wrote the name on the board. They were together for 19 months. My chest was already tightening. I sat in the chair across from his desk and pressed my hands flat on my thighs. What happened? Month 6, she moved in. Month 10, she was managing his administrative operations, vendor payments, billing cycles, payroll coordination. She presented it as helping him grow. He was grateful. Robert's jaw tightened with a disgust. He was keeping professional. Month 14, she proposed consolidating his personal and business accounts into a joint management structure. Said it was for tax efficiency. Under Illinois law, a joint account with co-signatory authority means both parties can authorize transactions independently. You don't need the other person's approval to move money, as long as both names are on the account. I felt the blood leave my face. I felt it go a slow, draining cold that started at my temples and worked its way down. She had access to his operating capital. Full access, Robert said. Month 19, the relationship ended. 2 weeks later, Webb discovered that approximately $60,000 in receivables payments from clients for completed projects had been redirected from his primary business account into a third-party account he didn't recognize. By the time his attorney traced the transfers, the money had moved twice more through intermediary accounts. Robert set the marker down. The trail went cold at a private account registered in a name Webb's attorney couldn't immediately connect to Lauren. It would have taken months of litigation to untangle. My throat was so tight that swallowing hurt. Did he go after her? He filed a civil complaint in DuPage County. Robert picked up the printed summary and handed it to me across the desk. Lauren's attorney responded within 72 hours that speed alone tells you she was prepared for exactly this possibility. The counter-allegation claimed Webb had authorized every transaction, that Lauren had been acting on his explicit instructions, and that he was attempting to use her as a scapegoat for his own financial mismanagement. I looked at the summary in my hands. My fingers were cold. The paper felt thin and inadequate for the weight of what was written on it. The case never went to trial, Robert continued. 6 weeks after the complaint was filed, both parties entered into an out-of-court settlement. Under Illinois civil procedure, a settlement of this kind, what's called a dismissal by stipulation, means both parties agree to end the litigation in exchange for terms they negotiate privately. The court record shows only that the case was filed and dismissed. It doesn't show the terms, the money, or who admitted what. He leaned forward. And the settlement included a mutual confidentiality agreement, a legally binding contract prohibiting either party from publicly discussing the dispute, the allegations, or the outcome. If Webb violates it, Lauren can sue him for breach of contract and collect damages. The room felt like it had gotten smaller. I pressed the heel of my hand against my sternum and held it there. So she walks away clean, I said. No public record, no finding, and Webb can't warn anyone, not without exposing himself to a lawsuit, Robert said. The confidentiality agreement is the whole point. It's not just protection, it's a silencer. His voice hardened. Tom, this is not a woman who made a mistake and learned from it. This is a woman who made a mistake, got caught, negotiated a legal mechanism to ensure no one would ever know about it, and then did it again. My eyes burned. I pressed the back of my hand hard against my mouth for 3 full seconds, felt the pressure of it against my lips, breathed through my nose until the burning backed down. I was not going to fall apart in Robert's office. I had made that decision on the drive over, and I was keeping it. How old was Webb? I asked when I trusted my voice again. My 16 Robert said no. Construction background, owned property, trusted her completely because she had spent 14 months making sure he would. The parallel hit me like a load-bearing beam, giving way the specific catastrophic lurch of something structural failing. 61 construction property. 68 construction property. The variables had changed. The formula had not. She didn't meet Daniel by accident, I said. My voice came out hollow and scraped like wood pulled across concrete. Robert's face did something complicated, the expression of a man who has confirmed something terrible and takes no satisfaction in it. I can't prove the circumstances of how they met, he said carefully. What I can tell you is that the pattern is not coincidental. The target profile is consistent. The methodology is consistent. The preparation is consistent. I stood up. My legs were unsteady in a way that had nothing to do with my knees. I walked to the window and looked out at Michigan Avenue. The snow coming down in earnest, now thick and white, coating the sidewalks and the parked cars and the awning of the coffee shop across the street. Chicago in December, burying everything under the same clean white surface. Pattern, not accident, I said. Pattern, not accident, Robert repeated quietly. I turned back from the window. My eyes were dry. My hands at my sides had stopped shaking. I picked up my coat from the back of the chair and put it on with the deliberate, unhurried movements of a man who has decided what he is going to do and is no longer afraid of the decision. I need two things, I said. The court case number, the public filing, and whatever contact information you have for Webb's former project manager. Already printed, Robert said and handed me a second sheet from the desk. Tom, are you going to be all right? I folded both sheets and put them in my breast pocket against my chest beside my heart. I'm going to be accurate, I said. That's better than all right. I drove home through the snow with Robert's documents against my chest and Margaret's voice in my head, saying the thing she always said when I was carrying something. I didn't know how to set down Tom. One true thing at a time. Build from what you know. That evening, I opened her recipe book and wrote in the margin in letters I pressed hard enough to leave an impression on the page beneath Richard Webb. Pattern, not accident. She has done this before, and she will do it again unless someone stops her. Then I underlined it, and I closed the book, and I waited for the moment I would know it was time. I wasn't there when it happened. I need to say that clearly, because everything I know about that afternoon, I know secondhand from Daniel's voice on the phone that night, from the particular way he told it. Slow and careful, like a man describing an accident he's still not sure he witnessed correctly. He called me at 9:47 in the evening. I know the exact time because I was sitting at Margaret's kitchen table with the recipe book open in front of me, adding a third page of notes, and I looked at the clock when my phone rang, the way you look at a clock when something interrupts you at an unexpected hour. His voice when I answered was the quietest I'd heard it since the night we sat together in the hospital parking lot after Margaret died and couldn't figure out how to go back inside. Dad, he said, I need to tell you something that happened today, and I need you to just listen. Don't react yet. Just listen. My hand tightened around the phone until my knuckles ached. I'm listening, I said. I went to the apartment this afternoon, he said. Lauren didn't know I was coming. I got out of a meeting early, and I wanted to see the place, check on how the furniture was coming together. A pause. A breath that was longer than a breath should be. The front door was unlocked. I walked in and I could hear her in the bedroom, on the phone. I thought it was a work call, so I was going to wait in the kitchen. Give her a minute. My chest caved inward like a wall with the supports cut. I pressed my free hand flat against the kitchen table and held it there. She was talking to her mom, Daniel said. His voice cracked on the word mom, A small fracture like a hairline in concrete that you almost miss. Almost. I heard her say, she said, "Daniel doesn't push back on anything I decide. That's what makes this work, Mom. He trusts me completely, and he doesn't ask the right questions." And then she laughed. His voice went raw at the edges like skin abraded. She laughed, Dad, like it was something to be proud of. The burning came back behind my eyes, fast and vicious. I pressed the heel of my palm against my eye socket, the way I'd been doing for 6 weeks now, whenever the grief and the fury arrived together, and I couldn't afford to let either of them out. I held my breath for 3 full seconds. "What else did she say?" I asked when I could. "Ma," she said. Daniel stopped. I heard him clear his throat, and the sound of it, the effort of holding himself together, the exact same effort I recognized, because it was the effort I'd been making since October, broke something open in my chest that I couldn't close again. She said, "Once we're married and the asset structure is in place, the father becomes irrelevant. He's old and he's sentimental and he trusts Daniel." And her mom said something I couldn't hear clearly, and Lauren said, "Exactly. That's exactly why this works." My throat seized. My vision went bright and blurry at the edges in a way that had nothing to do with my eyes. "Daniel," I said, and my voice came out broken in the middle of his name, cracked right down the center of the 2 syllables, like wood splitting along the grain. I stopped. I breathed. I tried again. "Daniel, are you somewhere safe right now?" "I'm in my car," he said. "In the parking garage. I've been sitting here for 3 hours, Dad. I didn't know where to go." His voice collapsed on the last 4 words. Not all the way, not fully, but enough that I could hear the boy in it. The 8-year-old boy who used to come find me when something scared him and stand in the doorway of whatever room I was in until I looked up and noticed him. I didn't know who else to call. My hand came up and covered my mouth. I pressed hard. My eyes were burning so badly that tears were running down my face before I had consciously decided to cry, and I was 68 years old and I didn't care. "You did right," I said when I could make words come out. "You called exactly right. Listen to me, are you warm enough in that car?" "Yeah." A wet scraped sound. "Yeah, I'm okay. I need you to drive somewhere warm," I said. "Not the apartment. Not home, not your apartment. Is there somewhere you can go tonight? A friend, a colleague, anywhere you feel safe." "My buddy James has a place in Lincoln Park," he said. "He's been telling me to come over for months." "Call James," I said. "Go there tonight. And Daniel," my voice threatened to break again, and I held it together through pure will. "Don't talk to Lauren tonight. Not until we've had a chance to sit together and I can show you what I know." A pause that stretched and stretched. "You know things," he said, not a question. "I've known things for 6 weeks," I said. "I've been waiting until you were ready to hear them. I think tonight you're ready." He made a sound then that wasn't quite a sob and wasn't quite a laugh. A raw, ragged exhale that carried every feeling he'd been holding in that parking garage for 3 hours. "Why didn't you just tell me, Dad?" And that question, that honest, heartbroken question from my son, hit me somewhere so deep and so specific that I had to press my fist against my sternum and hold it there for a long moment before I could answer. "Because I needed you to believe me," I said. "And for you to believe me, you needed to hear something true from her first. Not from me." My voice steadied itself on the last sentence, found its footing. "Come to Oak Park Saturday. I'll show you everything. And then you decide what you want to do. Not me, you." He came. He always was going to come. He was my son. I knew the call would come. I just didn't know which direction it would travel, whether it would be Daniel calling to say he was ready, or Lauren calling because she'd gotten there first. It was Lauren who got there first. She called Daniel the morning after he spent the night at James's place in Lincoln Park. I know this because Daniel told me later in the careful, reconstructive way he described everything from those days, like a man cataloging the wreckage after a storm, trying to understand which pieces had been structural and which had just been in the way. She told him she was worried about him, that he'd seemed distant lately, that she'd noticed a tension between him and his father, that she'd been afraid to bring up, but felt she had to now because she loved him and she couldn't watch it go unaddressed any longer. Then she told him that I had never truly accepted her. Daniel called me at 11 that morning. His voice was different from the night before. Not the raw, broken voice of the parking garage, but something harder and more careful, the voice of a man who has been given two versions of a story and is trying to figure out which one to stand on. "Dad," he said. "Lauren called me this morning." My stomach dropped straight through the kitchen floor. I gripped the edge of the counter with one hand and kept my voice absolutely level. "What did she say?" "She said..." He stopped, took a breath. "She said you've had a problem with her from the beginning, that you looked at her differently from the first time you met, that you've been trying to find reasons to end the engagement because you don't want to let go of me." His voice tightened on the last sentence, strained at the seams. "Dad, is that true?" The injustice of it hit me like a fist to the sternum, a physical impact, hot and sharp, radiating outward. I pressed my back against the kitchen counter and breathed through it the way you breathe through physical pain, steadily, deliberately, refusing to let it make the decisions. "Daniel," I said, "I want you to ask yourself one question before I say anything else. When you were sitting in that parking garage last night, after what you heard, who did you call?" A pause. "You," he said. "Why?" Another pause, longer. "Because I trust you." "Then give me until Saturday," I said. "Come to Oak Park the way we planned. If after you see everything I have you still think I've been trying to control your life, I'll accept that. I'll back off completely. But give me Saturday first." She said you'd say something like that. His voice cracked slightly. "She said you'd try to make it about evidence, that it's what you do when you feel threatened, you build a case instead of just talking." My jaw clamped so hard my back teeth ached. Because that sentence, that precise surgical sentence, was brilliant in the worst possible way. It had taken the most legitimate thing I could do and reframed it as a character flaw. If I showed Daniel documentation, I was building a case. If I expressed emotion, I was feeling threatened. She had closed both exits before I reached them. "Anael," I said very carefully. "I have been a builder for 42 years. I build cases because cases are what hold things up when feelings aren't enough. That's not a flaw. That's the difference between a wall that stands and one that falls on someone." I stopped. Let that sit for exactly 3 seconds. "Saturday, 11 o'clock, your mother's kitchen table, that's all I'm asking." The line went quiet in the way it goes quiet when someone is fighting with themselves, not with you, but with the competing pressures inside their own chest. I heard Daniel exhale a long, ragged breath that told me how much he was carrying. "Okay," he finally said. "Saturday, 11. "Thank you," I said. After we hung up, I stood in the kitchen for a long time, with both hands pressed flat on the counter. My head bowed, my eyes closed. Margaret's clock ticked above the stove. Outside, the December wind moved through the maple tree with a sound like shuffling paper. I called Robert. "She got to him this morning," I said the moment he answered. "How bad?" Robert's voice sharpened instantly. "Manageable," I said. "He's still coming Saturday." But Robert, she told him I was trying to control him, that I build cases instead of connecting emotionally. She anticipated exactly what I would do, and she named it first. Robert swore under his breath. Then, Tom. That means she's scared. I lifted my head. What? A woman who is completely confident doesn't burn her credibility with preemptive accusations, he said. She waits. She lets you make the first move and then responds. The fact that she called Daniel this morning before you had a chance to, that's not strength. That's a woman who knows the clock is running out and is throwing everything she has at the wall. A pause. Hold the line until Saturday. Don't contact her. Don't respond if she calls. Let her show Daniel who she is under pressure, because people always do. I straightened my back. My shoulders settled. "You're right," I said. "I know," he said. "I'm always right. You just take longer to agree with me than anyone I've ever met." For the first time in what felt like weeks, I made a sound that was almost a laugh. It hurt, coming out the way laughter does when you've been holding everything too tight for too long. But it was real. "Saturday," I said. "Saturday," Robert said. "Don't move until then." She came Friday morning. I wasn't expecting her. That was the point. I understood that immediately, in the 3 seconds between hearing the doorbell and opening the front door of the Oak Park house, to find Lauren Carter standing on my porch with a bottle of wine in one hand and a bakery box in the other. Her coat a deep burgundy against the December gray, her smile calibrated to exactly the right temperature of warmth. She had timed it with precision. Daniel was coming tomorrow. Whatever I planned to show him, she intended to neutralize it today. "I hope this isn't a bad time," she said in the voice she used for situations where she had already decided the time was fine. I wanted to come by properly. Just the two of us, no pressure, no agenda. I feel like we've never had a real conversation. I stepped back from the door. "Come in," I said. She moved through the entry hall with the observant cataloging attention I recognized from the first week at Harlow Tower. Eyes moving across the space in quick assessing sweeps. Margaret's coat hook. The photographs along the stairwall. The oak cabinet beside the refrigerator, the one with the combination lock. "This is a beautiful home," she said, setting the wine and the bakery box on the kitchen counter, with the comfortable ease of a woman who intended to stay long enough to justify bringing refreshments. "Daniel talks about growing up here. The yard, the maple tree. I can see why he loves it. Margaret planted that tree," I said. I poured water because I wasn't going to make coffee and signal this was a social call. "What brings you by Lauren?" She turned to face me with an expression of soft sincerity that would have been completely convincing if I hadn't spent 2 months learning the distance between her face and her intentions. "I'm worried about us," she said. "About you and me. Daniel told me he's coming here tomorrow, and I don't want there to be things between us that we haven't said directly." She moved to the kitchen table and sat down without being invited. "Can we talk honestly?" "I prefer honesty," I said. I stayed standing near the counter. "I know you have concerns about me." She folded her hands on the table, a deliberate open gesture, palms slightly upward, the body language of someone presenting themselves as transparent. "I understand. You're protective of Daniel. That's natural. But I love your son, Thomas. I genuinely love him. And I want this family to work." "What specifically are you hoping to accomplish this morning?" I said. A flicker behind her eyes so brief that if I'd blinked, I'd have missed it. Then the smile resettled. I want to clear the air before tomorrow. Whatever you're planning to tell Daniel, I'd rather we discuss it first. Adult to adult. She reached into her coat and produced a document folded once clean white paper and laid it on the table between us with the quiet finality of a card being played. And I wanted to bring this. It's the property management authorization Daniel and I discussed. I know we talked about it before and you wanted time to think. I thought in the spirit of moving forward as a family, Lauren. My voice came out with a flatness that stopped her mid-sentence. I looked at the document on the table. I did not touch it. I know you prepared that authorization before you knew who I was. The temperature in the room changed. Not dramatically, she was too controlled for drama. But something shifted behind her eyes. Something recalculated. What do you mean? She said. I mean, the folder on your laptop was named before we were introduced, I said. I mean, the document on that table has my name pre-printed on the signature line, and you were carrying it before Daniel and I had a single conversation about authorization structures. I looked at her directly, the way I had never permitted myself to look at her in all the weeks at the penthouse. I mean that I know about Richard Webb. The name landed like a load-bearing beam dropped on concrete. Every carefully maintained element of her expression, the warmth, the softness, the open hands contracted. For exactly 3 seconds, the real Lauren Carter sat across from Margaret's kitchen table, and she was cold and calculating and absolutely furious, and she didn't bother to hide it because for 3 seconds she didn't realize she was showing it. Then the mask came back. Slower this time. Less perfect. I don't know what you think you know, she said. Her voice had dropped half a register, the warmth entirely gone. I know enough, I said. I know about the DuPage County civil filing. I know about the dismissal by stipulation and the confidentiality agreement that was supposed to make sure nobody could warn the next person. I moved to the table and picked up the document she'd placed there, turned it over once in my hands, and set it back down without reading it. I'm not signing this. I'm not signing anything you put in front of me. And I want you to understand something clearly, Lauren. I say this not as a threat, but as a fact. Daniel is coming here tomorrow, and he is going to see everything I have. She stood up. Her jaw was tight enough that I could see the muscle working in her cheek. Her hands, which had been so carefully open on the table, were now pressed flat against her thighs, the same gesture I'd been using for weeks, without realizing we'd arrived at the same instinct from opposite directions. You're making a mistake, she said. Her voice was low and controlled and stripped of every performance. Daniel loves me. Whatever you show him, he's going to have to choose between believing you and believing me. And you and I both know that you two have been barely speaking for 2 years. The words were designed to find the wound. They did. My chest tightened with a grief so specific, it had its own address, the 2 years of careful surface Sunday calls, the Easter lunch. The distance I had not known how to close. I met her eyes. You might be right, I said. He might choose you. That's his right. But he is going to make that choice with the full truth in front of him. Not the version you've been building for 14 months. I walked to the kitchen door and held it. The bakery box is welcome to stay. You should go. She picked up her coat from the back of the chair. She walked past me through the kitchen door without another word, but at the entry hall, one hand on the front door, she stopped. You're going to regret this, she said without turning around. I've spent 42 years building things meant to last, I said. I know the difference between a foundation and a facade. You should go, Lauren. The door closed behind her. I stood in the entry hall for a long time, listening to the silence the house made after she left, the particular quality of quiet that follows the departure of someone who has taken all the oxygen in the room with them. My legs were unsteady. My hands were trembling faintly. My eyes were burning with a heat that had equal parts anger and grief mixed into it. I walked back to the kitchen. I picked up Margaret's recipe book from the counter where I'd left it. I sat down at the table at my chair, the one I'd sat in for 31 years of breakfasts and arguments and celebrations and ordinary Tuesday evenings, and I opened it to the last page I'd written on. I added one line: "She came today. She knows I know. Tomorrow Daniel will know too." Then I closed the book, put it in the serious drawer, and started making dinner. My son was coming in the morning. I wanted the house to smell like something warm when he walked in. Daniel sat in his car in my driveway for a full minute before getting out. I watched from the kitchen window and did not go to the door. I let him come to me the way I had learned late and at great cost, that the most important things in life cannot be pulled toward you. They have to arrive on their own. He knocked, then opened the door himself because it was unlocked, because I had left it unlocked on purpose. "Hi, Dad." His voice was careful and exhausted and young in a way it hadn't sounded since he was a teenager carrying something he didn't know how to name. "Hi, son." My throat tightened like a fist closing. "Sit down." I made soup. He hung his coat on Margaret's hook. Not mine, hers, the one with the small brass flower she'd found at a flea market in 1994, and sat in his chair at the kitchen table. I set the bowl in front of him. He looked at it for a moment with the expression of a man receiving something he hadn't known he needed. "You cooked," he said. "Your mother used to say food first," I said, sitting across from him. "She was always right about that. We ate. We talked about small things." Then Daniel set his spoon down and looked at me with gray-brown eyes that were mine and Margaret's both, and said, "Show me, Dad, all of it." I got up and opened the serious drawer. I laid everything on the table in chronological order: Margaret's recipe book, with 43 pages of my handwriting, the Harlow Tower development documents, Robert's 2-page summary on Richard Webb, the DuPage County Civil Filing Index. I sat back down and looked at my son. "I'm going to tell you everything in sequence," I said. "Dates, exact words, documented facts. When I'm done, take whatever time you need." He nodded, his hands wrapped around his coffee mug with a grip that was slightly too tight. I talked for 2 hours. I told him about the contract D. Miller, the name I hadn't recognized, the spreadsheet application on Lauren's laptop, the systematic photographs she took of surrounding buildings from his living room window, the parking garage I read from the recipe book, because I wanted him to hear the documentation he doesn't know yet. He won't. He trusts Daniel completely, and Daniel trusts me. When I read that line, Daniel's knuckles went white around the mug. A sound came out of him, low, compressed, something that lived below the level of language. "Keep going," he said through his teeth. I told him about the folder. Future Miller assets. I read him the entries: Oak Park property, North Side parcels, retirement accounts, Unit 2401 with the notation pending transfer confirmation. Then I opened the manila envelope and placed the Harlow Tower development documents on the table. "This is what you actually bought," I said. "Or believed you bought." Daniel stared at my name on the investor records, at the dates 3 years old, predating his purchase contract by 30 months. His face changed in slow waves, like a wall registering the first tremors of something structural giving way beneath it. "You bought it," he said, barely above a whisper. "Your mother and I planned it together," I said. My voice cracked on "together" just at the seam of the word "just once." "We wanted to give you something real. The deed was supposed to be in your name, fully paid after the wedding." I held his gaze. Lauren was cataloging an asset I hadn't told anyone about. Daniel put both hands over his face. His shoulders shook once a single controlled convulsion, the effort of a man keeping himself together through will alone. When he lowered his hands, his eyes were red at the rims and wet at the lashes, and his jaw was working against something enormous. "Why didn't you just tell me?" His voice broke clean down the middle. "Dad, why didn't you just call me in October?" "Because she had been building for 14 months, I said. My own eyes burned. I did not look away from him. "She had been showing you a version of me, difficult, controlling, unable to let go. And she'd done it so carefully, you'd internalized it without knowing. If I had called you with impressions and gut feelings, you would have heard exactly the man she'd prepared you to hear." I touched the recipe book between us. I needed something you could hold in your hands. Something she couldn't explain away. Daniel reached out and opened the book. He read slowly, turning pages, his breathing changing with each entry, deeper, more effortful, the breathing of someone absorbing blow after blow without time to recover. When he reached the final line, "She came today. She knows I know. Tomorrow Daniel will know too." He closed the book and pressed both palms flat on the cover and bowed his head. Then he raised it. His eyes were wet and steady, and completely wholly his own. "What do you want me to do?" he asked. I looked at my son, 35 years old, Margaret's stubborn chin, the boy who had ridden beside me on Saturday inspections, at 8 years old, because he wanted to go wherever I went. "Nothing," I said. "The decision is yours. All of it entirely yours." He wiped his eye with the back of his hand, quick and unsentimental. Then he looked at the engagement party invitation on the refrigerator held there by the Niagara Falls magnet that had been in that spot since 1987. "The party is tomorrow," he said. "I know." "Are you coming?" I looked at him steadily. "Are you still asking me to—" He picked up the recipe book and held it against his chest with both arms, the way Margaret used to hold things she loved that were also heavy. "Yeah, Dad," he said, and his voice was raw and real and everything. "I'm asking you to come." Bellini's was Margaret's kind of place. Small tables, warm light, the kind of restaurant where the noise level told you people were actually talking to each other. I arrived 15 minutes early and sat facing the door the way I always do. Robert was at the bar. He caught my eye and nodded once, the nod of a man who has stood beside you through hard things and is prepared to do it again. "You ready?" he said when I reached him. "I built the thing," I said. "I know how it holds." He handed me water and went to find his seat. Guests arrived. Susan Carter came in a green dress that managed to look festive and strategic simultaneously. She saw me across the room, and her eyes did a rapid cold assessment before her smile arrived. I nodded. She nodded back. Two people who understood each other perfectly, saying nothing about it. Daniel arrived at 7:12 alone and walked straight to me. His face was composed with the particular stillness of a man who has made his decision and is living inside it. "She's parking," he said quietly. Then he gripped my shoulder hard, brief, the grip of someone saying through pressure what cannot be said in a crowded room. "Thank you for being here." "There was nowhere else I would have been," I said. Lauren arrived 4 minutes later in midnight blue, perfectly calibrated, effortlessly elegant. She kissed Daniel's cheek. She worked the room with warm, specific attention, remembering names, asking the right questions. I watched her and felt something that lived in the uncomfortable territory between admiration and grief. Dinner was served. Conversation flowed. For 40 minutes, the evening was exactly what it appeared to be. Then Lauren stood, lifted her champagne glass, and the table quieted. I want to thank everyone for being here, she said, her voice carrying the perfect blend of warmth and composure. And I especially want to thank Thomas. She turned to me with an expression of gratitude so precisely constructed, it deserved a frame. This man built our home with his own hands. Every floor, every detail, every light. We are going to build our life in that apartment because of him. She raised her glass. To Thomas. Glasses lifted around the table. I set mine down without drinking. I stood up. The movement was quiet, and it drew every eye the way that unexpected stillness always does. Lauren's glass was still raised. Her smile held. But something very small and very cold began moving behind her eyes. "Thank you, Lauren," I said. My voice was level and warm and reached every corner of the room without effort. "I do want to say something, if that's all right." I looked at Daniel. He gave me the smallest nod, barely visible. It was everything. "I spent 3 weeks in that apartment before anyone knew I was Daniel's father," I said. "I came in every morning and I built what the plans called for, and I paid attention to what the space was really being built to hold. I reached into my jacket and placed Margaret's recipe book on the table. I want to give Daniel something tonight. This belonged to his mother. The last 40 pages belong to the truth." I looked at my son. "Daniel, it's yours. You decide what you do with it." Daniel reached out and took it with steady hands. His eyes were bright with the brightness of a man holding himself together through something that cost him enormously. Lauren set her glass down. "Thomas, I'm not quite finished," I said, quietly, without heat. She stopped. "I can lose money," I said, looking at her directly, not with anger, not with triumph, but with the simple clarity of a man who has decided to say one true thing and build it back. "I have done it before, and I know exactly what it costs. But a family that loses trust is not as easy to fix as a house. You cannot reframe the foundation. You cannot repair it. You rebuild from whatever remains, one true thing at a time." I looked at Daniel. "Your mother believed that. I believe it. I believe in you." The table was very still. Susan Carter pressed her fingers to her lips. Her eyes moved between her daughter and Daniel with the rapid recalculation of someone whose assumptions were collapsing in real time. Lauren looked at Daniel. Her composure, the extraordinary practiced composure of 14 months, was fracturing at the edges now. The micro-tension at the jaw, the shoulders gone rigid, the eyes working visibly hard. "Daniel." Her voice dropped low, aimed at him alone, stripped of performance. "Whatever he told you, we can talk. Just us. Please." Daniel looked at her for a long moment. His hands were flat on the table on either side of his mother's recipe book. Steady, deliberate, his father's hands. "Lauren," he said quietly, "I need time." She flinched. A full, visible flinch, the first completely unmanaged thing I had ever seen her do in 2 months of watching her manage everything. Susan rose and said her daughter's name in a low, urgent voice. Lauren stood. She straightened her dress with a precise, habitual gesture. She looked at me one final time, and in her eyes I saw something I had not expected, not fury, but exhaustion. The exhaustion of someone who has performed without rest for a very long time and has just heard the curtain coming down. Then she walked out, and Susan followed, and the door closed. Robert stood up from his end of the table. "I believe there's a chocolate lava cake coming," he announced in the carrying, cheerful voice of a man who knows exactly when a room needs redirecting. "Best in Chicago. I verified this personally." Grateful laughter moved around the table. Conversation restarted. Daniel looked at me across the emptied space where Lauren had been. His eyes were wet and steady and completely his own. "Stay," he said. "I'm not going anywhere," I said. We stayed until the restaurant closed. We talked about his mother. We talked about the apartment and what it had been built for. We talked about trust and what it costs to rebuild and whether the price is worth paying. We didn't resolve everything. We had time for that. We had a kitchen table in Oak Park and 2 bowls that would always be set when one of us needed the other. Walking out into the December snow, Daniel put his hand on my shoulder the way he had when he was small, and we were heading somewhere he wasn't completely sure about. "Thanks, Dad," he said, "for all of it." I put my hand over his. "That's what I'm here for," I said. "That's all I've ever been here for." The snow came down around us, soft and quiet, and the city held us both. People ask me sometimes what I learned from all of this. I tell them the same thing every time. I learned that love without honesty is just a beautiful house with no foundation. It looks perfect from the street. But the moment real weight is placed on it, grief, fear, betrayal, the walls come down. I spent 42 years building structures meant to last. And I almost lost the most important one, my son. Not because of Lauren, but because of my own silence. I kept secrets I told myself were protective. I waited when I should have spoken. I controlled when I should have trusted. So let me say this plainly, the way I wish someone had said it to me. Don't be like I was. Don't wait until the foundation is cracking to tell the people you love the truth. Don't confuse protecting someone with managing them. The people who love you deserve the full picture, not the version you've decided is safe for them to see. I'm not a perfect father. I'm a 68-year-old widower who makes soup when he doesn't know what else to do and talks to his late wife through the kitchen window. But I believe, and this is where I have to give credit where it's due, because God has a way of putting exactly the right moment in front of you. When you've finally stopped trying to engineer the outcome yourself, I believe that when we stop hiding, the truth has room to do what we never could. My son has his mother's recipe book on his kitchen shelf now. The apartment has good floors, and we have Sunday calls that sound nothing like the weather report anymore. If this grandpa story stayed with you, if this family story reminded you of someone you love, someone you've been meaning to call, something you've been meaning to say, drop it in the comments. I read everyone. And if you know someone who needs to hear a grandpa story about trust, about family, about what a house is really made of, share this family story with them. It might be exactly what they need today. Subscribe if you want to stay. There are more stories where this one came from. Thank you for staying until the very end. It means more than you know. And one small note before you go, some of the stories on this channel contain fictional elements created with the purpose of exploring real human experiences and values. If that's not the kind of content you're looking for, I respect that completely. Feel free to find what speaks to you. But if you're staying, I'm glad you're here.